The state of tea in the United States is something of a national embarrassment. If you visit a great tea region in China, Taiwan, or India, people there might express pity or disdain about American tea. They consider it crap, basically, the equivalent of a microwave TV dinner or coffee from a Keurig. My guest today is Josh Freedman, who started a tea business so more Americans can try and buy great teas from China and Taiwan. But the focus of our conversation was not his business. For Josh, selling tea is an offshoot of his primary career. He calls his small hobbyist business PhT, a pun on PhD, because he is, first and foremost, a China scholar. Josh grew up in New Jersey, but learned to speak Chinese fluently enough that he's performed stand-up comedy in Beijing. His PhD was about Chinese politics, he was a researcher at the Center for the Study of Contemporary China, and he's a magazine editor focused on East Asia and international relations. He's also, I should add, an old friend from college. Josh generously agreed to be part of a test episode of Gastronomics back when I was piloting the show, and I enjoyed it so much I spent this past week turning it into a real episode. For Josh, visiting tea mountains and becoming part of the tea industry is a way to better understand China, to make concrete the big ideas he studies in research and academia. Because it is one thing to know that the Chinese government plays a starring role in the economy, and it's another to find that tea trends and popular products are not the brainchild of entrepreneurs, but of enterprising local bureaucrats. As someone who'd like to better understand China, I really appreciated this way of learning about the Chinese economy through tea. I think you will too. And for anyone with a passion for food and drink, but who doesn't want to make it their full-time and probably stressful job, I think Josh's on-the-side tea business is an interesting model as well. I'm Alex Mayasi. This is Gastronomics. Josh Freedman, welcome to Gastronomics.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So we are talking today more or less because I got an email from you last year that said it's tea time again. Could you maybe tell us a bit about that email and why you sent it?
Yeah, so for the last more than a decade now, I have been doing work involving Asia. I lived in Beijing for a few years. I lived in Taipei for a year. I did a PhD mostly about Chinese politics, and that involved a lot of being in and around Asia. And one of my hobbies, both before and after, was drinking tea. And tea became a great way for me to learn more about the places I was in. It wasn't directly related to all of my research, but it was a good way to learn more about what was going on. And in the process, everybody figured out that I drank a lot of really good tea. And every time I would come home, they would ask me for said tea. So I started bringing back large quantities to the point where it was influencing my budget. And I decided I should actually try to turn this into something maybe a little bit more formal so that, one, I wouldn't go broke, but also, two, make it more of a structured and creative way that I could actually figure out, hey, what are some teas that I really like that I want to share with people? And so about a year ago now, I very softly beta tested this.
The softest of soft launches.
The softest of soft launches. So soft that you didn't even know about the first round. But it was just a couple of teas from Taiwan where I had been living for that past year to try to see if I could figure out a way to do this into a mini business of sorts. And that went really well. I got rid of everything I had pretty quickly and people loved it. And it made me feel good and excited about doing more. And so after a lot more equivocating, I scaled it up a little bit. So this time I acquired 4 teas from Taiwan, tried to get a sort of range of how you could get a sense of different types of Taiwanese tea. And I put them on offer and I sent it out to everybody in my address book, basically saying it's tea time again. For those who had it the first time, they got the again. Those who didn't also got the again. And that's where we are now. And that's what PhT is currently where it's at.
So PhT is the punny name of your small hobbyist, mostly selling to friends and family tea business. Is that
That's correct.
Accurate? And
I'd be happy to sell to others too.
Okay, yeah. There are perhaps larger ambitions, but yeah, starting with friends and family. I feel like we've also kind of skipped over an important impetus for your business, which is to not sugarcoat it. Is tea in the U.S. pretty much just crap? My sense is maybe the rest of the world, or at least the tea drinking parts of the world, just think what's going on in the U.S. is pretty embarrassing when it comes to tea.
When I tell people in Asia that there are actually a lot of Americans who drink tea, they're very confused.
Huh.
They're like, what are you talking about? Like, they all drink coffee. Nobody drinks tea. Or they drink Lipton. Lipton is the word that means bad tea. No offense to Lipton. Please don't sue me, whatever. Like, when people want to laugh about how low quality tea is, they just, it's not to mean Lipton as a thing. Just like the idea of a black tea bag mass produced with just tea dust, basically. The joke is that it's the stuff that's swept up off the floor after you actually process the good tea. That's not actually how it's made, but the goal is not the highest quality tea, it's mass consumption.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of people in the US who actually like and want good tea. There are a lot more people who are interested in it who haven't had that experience, but when they're exposed to it, get excited about it.
Yeah, because I think it is surprising to me that you could go to a very high end restaurant where they are charging a lot and therefore the service is great. They know like where the cow came from for your steak. They know the farm where the vegetables are coming from. But then I think places like that, it's definitely not uncommon for them to serve. If someone wants tea, you get a tea bag that most people who know tea would think is like, that's kind of pathetic.
And I don't think they do that with coffee, right? Like you have to at least meet a certain quality standard if you're going to serve somebody coffee at a fancy restaurant. But you're right. You can get away with low quality tea and nobody will bat an eye. It's like some kind of learned helplessness here, where we've lowered our standards so much that we just assume that it's normal. That is correct. All the Michelin star restaurants that are listening, get your act together. I'll get you some better tea if you want.
And then, you know, I described PHT as a hobbyist business. You didn't seem to object to that framing of it. Like, what is your goal with PHT? What's the hope for it?
The basic goal is to be able to break even enough that I can keep doing this with different tea drops. For the next one, I would love to do something with different types of sort of more obscure Chinese teas. I have a number of connections and have done a lot of travels in parts of China where I think the tea is really interesting and good, but is not the normal type of black or green tea that you will find in supermarkets. If I can make enough money with this, I can do another tea drop and continue to do that, because there's so many different types of tea, so many different stories that go with it. And the fun part of it for me is not only procuring these teas, but getting to know the people who do it, learning about their stories. It's a very different crowd of people than I normally interact with. You know, it's not in the halls of academia. Very few of these people would ever have anything to do with the halls of academia. And so it's a really fun way to get to know how they learn their craft, what drives them, and all the economics and politics and social stories that are involved in that.
The path to Josh's hobbyist tea business started in 2014, when a fellowship took him to Beijing to study Chinese and China. And for somewhat random reasons, he ended up at an agricultural university. The professors gave him some advice. China is not just Beijing and Shanghai. They told him to go to smaller cities in the countryside. Over Chinese New Year, a student invited Josh to spend the festival in his hometown. It was a tea-grown region, and Josh realized learning about tea could be a way to follow his professor's advice. And then he discovered that tea was also a great way to practice his language skills and meet people from the countryside, even when he was in the heart of Beijing.
One way that I really both felt I could immerse myself and also improve my Chinese was to go to the Beijing tea market. Market is a weird word for it, because it's not like a market like you think of in the sense of there's a farmer's market with a few stands on the street. It is a whole like 1.5 kilometer, I think, long block of just regular looking buildings and some warehouses. There are people who live there, but basically every store that's there, and these giant shopping malls included, has something to do with tea. So it's different people selling different types of tea, whether black, green, oolong, pu'er, whatever. There's people selling teaware. There's people selling packaging. So if you want to be able to take your tea and put it in the right bags and get your labels printed, basically anything that you can think of related to tea. I think the Beijing tea market has a few thousand stores on this sort of block.
So is this like the epicenter of the tea world, or like the biggest concentration of tea stores, or
No, not even close.
not even close?
So
Okay, yeah.
the one in Guangzhou in the south is about twice the size. But anyways, it was a great place to just talk to people. These people are there. There's just shop after shop after shop. They're drinking tea whether you're there or not. And so I didn't feel bad going and drinking tea with them because they were doing it anyways. And usually they were pretty happy to talk to me. If I felt like I was bothering them, I wouldn't do it. But generally
But they were
speaking,
something of a captive market, it sounds like, for practicing your Chinese at the time.
they were a captive market.
Yeah.
I want to say it was a two-way street and they benefited by having a conversation with me. But yes, it was a captive market and I enjoyed it. And of course, I was drinking really good tea and learning about tea as well. If I bought a little bit, that was fine. But ultimately, they're doing wholesale. So me buying 50
Right,
grams
yeah,
of tea is like, it means nothing to them. So it didn't even really matter whether I was buying or not. But it was a great opportunity. I mean, all the people who are in this tea market are from rural areas of China. It's people from tea growing areas, agricultural areas who are in the middle of this big city. So it was a really interesting sort of sociological place to be a part of. And just wandering through the halls, the smell of tea is very strong. And there's kids playing and people's families are there. I really love the place.
Ultimately, Josh spent far more than the 1 year of his fellowship in China. He spent multiple more years in China and Taiwan, got his PhD on Chinese politics and public opinion, and he still travels to China and East Asia regularly. In our conversation, we discussed 3 major insights from his time researching tea and starting his tea business. But first, I want to acknowledge that an American in China getting more interested in tea is not an exceptional story. You may be understandably wondering whether Josh's insights and the tea he sells are worth your time. So I think the most efficient way I can convince you that Josh's zeal for learning about China and tea is exceptional is to share a story about how he set a very ambitious goal for improving his Chinese language skills. If I'm remembering correctly, did you almost perform stand-up comedy in Chinese in China?
Almost is the wrong word. I definitely did.
Okay, great. Yeah. I think I didn't know whether it was stand-up comedy. Not that you like almost did it and then ran away before showtime. I just didn't know if stand-up comedy was the right word.
No, I did. I had been doing comedy for a long time. That was my other side project. I had done some small shows and things. And so after moving to China, one of my goals was to perform in Chinese. And I set a very ambitious goal because I'm an insane person that I should be able to do this by the end of my first year in China. And I did. It wasn't good. It wasn't good, but that was not part of the ambitious goal. The ambitious goal was to do it, not to do it well.
Did you have like a joke that you felt like really killed?
So a lot of it was you have to be aware of your positionality. When you're a non-Chinese person on stage, like speaking in Chinese, you can't just be like, hey guys, I'm one of you. And so you have to start by acknowledging that this is different than what they're expecting. And I think for me, that meant what I wanted to do was sort of use that position to identify things that I thought were interesting cross-culturally or different in China versus the US. Even just the way you introduce yourself. Like in Chinese, you introduce yourself by saying, like, the characters of my name are this, this, and this. And to clarify which characters they are, because they're all homophones, you say this character, which is the same as this other character, like D as in David, E as in Edward. And so I would do that with my Chinese name, but you're supposed to use examples that are like nice and powerful. And I would always use like the most demeaning and least impressive words to describe my characters. And they thought that was funny because nobody would ever do that if you were Chinese. But for me, I was like, well, these are the obvious words. Like,
yeah, it's Jewish comedy in Beijing, basically.
Exactly. My character is, I don't know, E like egg, or like, yeah, so you get it. So stuff like that. And it was fun. And I'm now retired from stand-up totally.
Okay, quick aside over. Now back to what Josh learned about the Chinese economy by spending time in the tea industry.
In a place like China, being on the ground just matters.
Yep.
And no matter how many books you read or how much you think about or read about it or talk to people about it, you just sort of have to see how it's done. Just spending time on the ground there, you get a sense of a few things. One is how the local government interacts with tea producers, right? So one thing that was happening was there's a government push for ensuring there's enough what they call staple crops. So making sure people grow enough rice and wheat. Turns out lots of people don't want to grow rice and wheat because it is not that lucrative and it's kind of hard work.
Right. But the government probably wants to make sure enough is being grown. So
it's a national security issue. They don't want to be reliant on imports for basic food needs, especially given the geopolitical context in which China feels pressured by countries like the United States. But people don't want to grow these things, right? And they can make more money with less work. Tea is one of them, fruits, nuts, other things. And so just by going to investigate the tea, you sort of by accident see these other stories going on, right? The government is trying to encourage farmers to grow more of these other crops, and usually they are not particularly amenable to that. That is something that I would have never understood what was happening, those sort of dynamics at play, unless I saw it in person.
Right. So you saw this butting of heads, or this dynamic of local government trying to meet this national security goal of growing enough grains versus people being business-minded, entrepreneurial, wanting to grow crops like tea that could be more lucrative.
Right. And the government obviously has to find ways to incentivize people or coerce them.
Were there times that you did, talk with a tea farmer who talked about, I don't know, interactions with the local government and facing that pressure? Or
I mean, you're just hanging around. You hear conversations.
Yeah, or this is just like, for them, it's like them talking shop.
People are pretty blunt, especially rural farmers.
What a dream for a student and researcher, that people who are very blunt.
Yeah, I mean,
which also is maybe not what I would expect in China. I think as an American, I'm used to the idea that there's a lot of fear of the government, and that, can I trust what I might hear from someone in China? Are they able to speak freely?
And I think the dynamic really changes as you get lower down to the ground, right? One of the classic political science analyses of the state-society relations and people's relation to their government in China is that people are much more trusting and supportive of the national government, the central government, the sort of the leaders in Beijing over local people who they often believe are not implementing the central dictates in the right ways. Now, I think that if you dig more deeply into this, it's a multifaceted question, and in many cases, the local governments are being given impossible tasks, right? It is a thankless job to some extent to be in this middle position.
So this was an early insight Josh got from spending time in the tea industry. And I found it particularly interesting because a common opinion in the US, or a common vibe or fear, is that China will win the future because it's an authoritarian state that can just do things. China can just build as much high-speed rail as the rest of the world has ever built. China can make 5-year plans to dominate the electric vehicle market and actually follow through. China can build tons of data centers without worrying about a few pesky residents stopping them. But in reality, as Josh saw and heard, the Chinese government is not all-powerful. Unless they want to coerce thousands and thousands of farmers into growing grain at gunpoint, they need to cajole or incentivize farmers to help grow the country's food reserves. Their ability to do so depends, in part, on the Communist Party being seen as competent and legitimate. But their support and their ability to, say, persuade tea farmers to instead grow grain for national security reasons might wane if China's economic growth falters. And over the past few years, China's GDP growth has declined from a world-leading 10% per year to more like 5% per year. And a fair number of economists suspect that the real rate is lower than that. So that's insight number one. The second insight came via a kind of tea mystery.
Can you tell me about what was going on with white tea when you were living in Beijing?
Yeah, so when I got to Beijing in 2014, white tea seemed to be everywhere. It was very popular. It's delicious. It's something that I hadn't really had. I'd never really had a lot of white tea unless it was in a mix with a bunch of potpourri flavors. And this white tea, it's like pretty sweet. It's kind of rich. I got really into it. These areas of southern China that I was in, they were growing white tea. And it turned out only a couple years before I got to Beijing, white tea was not very common at all. It was just sort of, when I had gotten there, was right on the cusp of when it was becoming popular.
Okay.
And
So white tea is trendy at the time, basically.
it was very trendy at the time. And so I started digging into how white tea became super popular, especially because there are a couple of different areas that are famous for producing white tea, but one of them is by far the most popular. If you say white tea, the first thing that people think of is one area of China that produces white tea, but it's not the only area. And so I got really interested in how did this particular area become the eponymous white tea source in such a short time, whereas other areas did not.
So was this kind of like an interesting little mystery that you stumbled on? It's like if you were studying abroad in Paris and it turned out champagne had also been made for the last 100 years in 3 other parts of France, but for some reason everyone called it champagne. And you're like, oh, why champagne, the Champagne region and not these other places?
Yeah, so it's definitely a mystery that only I'm interested in, and I don't think other people are interested in. But it wasn't just white tea. A couple of years later, it was these orange balls called xiaoqinggan, which is a special kind of bitter orange peel. They preserve the peel and they stick tea in it. And the skin has some sort of medicinal benefits. It's got a nice, interesting, fruity flavor, and it pairs well with some darker teas. That exploded. Everybody was selling this. And so I was interested also in the sense of how these different types of teas got super popular or didn't get popular, how certain areas became associated with it or not. And it felt to me like the sort of general answers of, this is popular because it tastes good is not enough to understand the dynamic. And so I sort of set out to investigate this question. So I did what was most fun for me.
Great.
Which was I went to these places. I went to 2 different white tea areas and tried to talk to tea farmers, local government where possible, sellers, even tea drinkers, right, to some extent, local historians sometimes, people who could talk me through this. And luckily, tea is a not sensitive topic. Right. A lot of topics in China are very sensitive. Tea tends to not be very sensitive. If I were researching ethnic minorities or if I was researching certain types of COVID policies, it would be a lot harder.
When you visited this region, what did you learn? How did it manage to become the place for white tea when there were other regions making white tea as well?
Yeah, so I think they did 2 things in particular, and I want to caveat that I want to do more research on this, but I will tell you my preliminary thoughts. First is that there were a few enterprising officials who surveyed the scene and figured out that there was a potential market for white tea. They produced a little bit of white tea and sort of figured out that maybe there was a market space for white tea if they could do it very well.
And by officials, we're talking about government bureaucrats?
Yeah, like deputy party secretaries, so people in charge of, determining the general economic direction, making things happen, organizing both the party and the local government. But it's not just that they can say it and it goes. They had to work with local producers to get them to produce white tea and then figure out how to market it. And so that was a challenge, but it helps when you have the government on your side because the government has more money and more connections, right? So they would take it to expos. They would try to advertise it. They try to make partnerships. And I think that they just happened to time it well. And when their product got good, more people started to want white tea and they were already out in front. A lot of times this fails. So that local official could have ended up with just another failed development project. This one happened to work.
But this is interesting. It feels like if we were having this conversation about a product that really got popular in the United States, we'd probably be talking about an entrepreneur, like a business person. Do you feel like this kind of like entrepreneurial government official is a very Chinese role?
If I put my academic hat on here, I will say I don't know enough about many other regions of the world to tell you. But I do think it is a function of the way the political system works. Political and economic systems are much more tied together. And it's not just that the local officials in China are doing this, right? They have to work with the entrepreneurs. And there are a number of enterprising entrepreneurs that sort of took the space. But it was really the government convincing the entrepreneurs to get on board with their plan, not the other way around. And so I do think it's a particularly, at least modern Chinese way of doing it, that the government is leading in this case. And then the second part, it's not just that they got it moving. In the time since, they've exercised a lot of control over ensuring that standards are met. So the brand is deeply associated with the place. And so they've done a lot of work to try to limit fakes. Anything that has that brand name on it meets a certain quality standard, involves a lot of digital surveillance, control, checks, agreements with entrepreneurs to keep up these standards in ways that other places, I don't know if they can or can't do it, but haven't done it as well. And there are other examples of teas in the past that have sort of succumbed to low quality. They became popular, but they kind of lost their market position because the popularity waned, or pollution became an issue and people started worrying about the quality of the tea, et cetera. So this area in particular has done a good job of keeping that up.
After years of bringing tea back from China and Taiwan to share with friends, Josh started his business, PHT. It's still fairly new and it's a one-man operation. He stores the tea in his New York City apartment, and he sells the tea through a newsletter, which is now a Substack called PHT. It was while setting up his tea business that Josh personally experienced insight number 3, how great supply chains are China's superpower.
One thing that I found while trying to do this in the United States is that getting all the pieces together can be hard. Like getting labels is not easy and it's pretty expensive. Getting the packaging right is not that easy and it can be expensive. And you have to go to all these different places and do it. Getting all the things together to make the tea go from a leaf to something you want to sell or give to somebody, there's a lot of moving parts. One thing that China has done particularly well is they're really good at supply chains. So when I was trying to get some of this stuff done when I was in China, it was so much easier. Like in the Beijing tea market itself, you could just within 10 meters or like 30 feet of each other, right? Like you go into this store, there's the packaging, and this store, there's the, getting the right label made and all that. And you can do it all at once.
Right. It's like you were walking into a store that said like tea supply chain, and it was just like all there, the whole supply chain. Yeah.
And because they're so specialized and good at it, everything is extremely cheap and you can get it all done in one go. It's just makes the process so much easier. Trying to do that in the US turned out to be way harder. Even I went to Chinatown to try to see if I could recreate it. Did not work. So I think that's also something that when we're thinking about the big picture Chinese economy, that's relevant too. You think about how even now, as China's own labor costs have gone up, why they're still really good at exporting a lot of things. And we're publishing a lot of articles now about China's growth model and why other countries are struggling to compete with China, even as China should be becoming less competitive.
Right. Their labor costs are going up. That was the original comparative advantage, but it's going away.
That has gone away, and they still aren't losing their competitive advantage in those industries, or a lot of those industries. Some of that is government subsidies, obviously, but a lot of it is they're really good at supply chains. Yeah. And they just have efficiencies built in that nowhere else has in the same way.
You can tell me whether this comparison feels apt, but it does remind me that there is very much a movement among historians and archaeologists to do recreations. There are people trying to sail across large bodies of water in ancient vessels that would have been available to people at the time they're studying, or they're trying to recreate ancient recipes and learn by doing. I wonder if there's an element here where you do feel like you were able to not just learn by book, learn by interview, but learn by doing in your chosen field.
Yeah, and I think a lot of tea is actually that way. I remember very specifically one tea farm I was at in Taiwan where I accidentally invited myself, not accidentally, I purposefully invited myself from what I think they did not realize was an invitation to join them in the process of actually producing tea. So withering it, jostling it, roasting it, turning it into the ball shapes, all of that. And so I spent the whole 24-hour period with these people as they made this type of tea. And at one point, the tea boss, he found out I was doing my PhD at the time, and he said, when you're making tea, you don't need a PhD. Being here, doing it with us, that is the best education you can get.
Yeah.
And that's how he passed it on to his son. And so I'm not trying to make the tea myself, so I don't need that kind of experiential learning. But in terms of the bigger picture questions that I care about, I think it's similar in the sense that I need that on the ground experience to be able to understand what these big concepts actually mean.
Well, that seems a nice place to end. So let's finish with two final questions here. First, what is one big insight about business or economics that you wish more people understood?
I think this already came up a lot, but I do want to say that politics matters. As a political scientist, I'm contractually obligated to say politics is important. But whether you're looking at Taiwan and the development of how it turned from a export-oriented economy to a domestic consumption-led economy, a lot of that was helped by political changes, by government programs, thinking about all the different boom and bust cycles in China, or why some places succeed and some don't. Again, a lot of it is the role of the government. And I think even in the US, right, if we think bigger picture on a lot of these, if we think about economics more generally, no issue is just a private sector only thing. So much of it is intertwined with laws. And people say that, and we all know that, but all the tea related things I've done has just reaffirmed that for me.
And a final question, what is one food or drink experience that you recommend to everyone?
There are so many amazing food and drink things that I've experienced while getting to travel around lots of parts of Asia. And I don't want us to be like, you got to go to this random store that you'll never go to. So what I want to suggest is an ingredient that you can get at most Chinese supermarkets in the US or elsewhere called furu. It comes in these little jars, and it is fermented chunks of tofu that, because it's been fermented long enough, it almost becomes like a little paste. And it's full of a very strong, salty umami flavor. So I first had this when I was in one part of China, and they just kind of have a big bowl of it at the table, and you're eating fried rice. You take a little cube of it and mix it in with the fried rice, and it just makes the flavor so much more powerful and strong. And then a lot of people use it. You can sort of water it down a little bit and put it over leafy vegetables and things, and it makes a great sauce. It's very accessible and it's very versatile. Highly recommend people try furu if you can get your hands on it.
All right. Well, Josh Freedman, thanks so much for this conversation.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for listening to Gastronomics. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a rating or review, or sharing it with a friend. It will really help the show. You can also get more Gastronomics and my other writing by subscribing to my newsletter at alexmayasi.substack.com. Thanks for listening.